Hello there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
yes.
perfect.
I think there is. I think they have been betrayed. I really do. I think the Labour Party has been despicable. We all know what the Tories do. You know, they're neoliberalists, and they've been in charge for 13 years. And I mean, the facts speak for themselves. Well, you've been here. You know, the National Health Service is falling apart. The education system is under stress. There's a housing crisis. You know, the prison and court system is a disgrace as well. And then, but what they do is they blame immigrants for all of their problems. Before, in the time of Daniel Blake, I don't know if you saw that film that we did, I, Daniel Blake, they tried to blame people on welfare. You know, and there was a poll carried out, and the ordinary person thought that something like 30% of the welfare budget was fraudulently claimed. In fact, it was a tiny, tiny figure of 0 point something percent. But it showed you how the grand lie lay at the heart of a government which was attacking the poor. And I think you see the same thing now with immigration. And I think, and you know, when you look at our film, you know, The Old Oak, you know, I went to those areas, and then you saw the actual physical mark of the mining industry and that great defeat in 1984 when the miners lost that strike. And that was a huge blow against the working class. And when you look at those communities today, you know, the housing, you know, the post office, the banks, well, you'll have seen it. The banks, the libraries, everything that makes worthwhile, you know, has receded. And so the people who are left there feel abandoned and forgotten. And then the housing prices went right down. And what they did, Lambrini, was they sent problem families up from the south of England, you know, people who had addiction problems, people coming out of prison, and they just dumped them there. So the people who lived there, they felt that there was no agency and no control of their lives, you know, so they felt angry and they felt furious. And I think they were right to feel that way. And then when immigrants or Syrians who suffered a great tragedy, you know, were sent into these areas without any consultation, many of them said, well, why us? Why not to Westminster? Why not to Chelsea, as we say in the film? You know, so that anger can be easily captured by the far right and stirred all up. And that's what we saw. But the great thing was we met tremendous activists on the ground, you know, who understood the situation. And I think, you know, that's where we find hope, I think, is when people have the intelligence to try and untangle things, you know. So they held out the hand of friendship to the Syrians, but they realized that the host community were in real trouble as well. The Syrians, when they arrived, they didn't expect to find hunger in the streets of England. They didn't expect to find people with their electricity cut off and people living without light. But that's what they found. So these activists were terrific. And, you know, put people in contact with each other. People that began to know each other and understand their lives and began to find out that they had a lot more in common with each other. So some of the friendships that they've started are still going on. I've just been down to see them just very, very recently. And it's wonderful to see how that creativity, you know, that intelligence to untangle, you know, untangle their frustrations and angers and say, well, they're not to blame, you know, they're not to blame for this.
But the far right is galloping, actually, in all over Europe, in all over the Western world, you can say. And it has to do with how the working class feels, isn't it? How abandoned it feels from the left too, because I saw in the movie that there was no reference to the Labour Party at all.
Yeah, well, the Labour Party and the Tory Party are very much the same thing just now, unfortunately. I mean, it was incredible to see how Jeremy Corbyn was destroyed. That was a remarkable, you know, display of political assassination, you know, in terms of his reputation. And, you know, much of it based on lies. And so that, because he was a threat to these big corporations, you know, and so they had to make sure he was destroyed, and they used all sorts of tactics to do that. And yes, there is a crisis on the left. I think once again they seem to be incapable of coming together. About the far right galloping all around Europe, we've just seen what's happened in Holland. I know Spain well because my partner's Spanish, and we've seen Vox and the PP almost make it. They didn't quite make it. I've just been to France, and activists there are very, very worried about the next election, what will happen on the far right. And we've seen the crazy guys in Argentina, you know, so there's a lot to be scared of. And especially, which is particularly depressing, you know, when we look at the big existential question right in front of our eyes, which is the climate change. You must know more about this than anyone in entire Europe. Greece must understand that better than anyone. I was in Greece just last week, and 19 degrees in December. You've had the fires. You have 98% of the scientists and the consensus warning us on what will happen. And what's happening? We've given the biggest subsidy to corporations, fossil fuel corporations, in our history. And we've used up more fossil fuels this year in entire history. So there's such a disconnect between political representation and what these corporations are doing and what people need. You know, I think we really live in very, very tough times. It's going to require great organisation and imagination to try to confront with that, you know, which is truly depressing. And many of the far right, of course, deny climate change. They think it's left-wing propaganda. I mean, how stupid can you get?
I really connected to what you said about the state leaving them there, because when they first started coming, if you remember, back in 2015, there were a lot of people, although we were in crisis, to take care of them, common people on the islands. And then when the state get in and the European Union get in, everything was destroyed and racism started rising. I mean, they destroyed the connection that was starting to create. I was very moved by that in the movie, I have to say, because I could see what was happening with my people before the government decided to take things on their hands, if you can use this phrase for a government. But
I think our government in the UK has been absolutely terrible. You know, really, the rhetoric that they've used, the vicious lies that they've used, you know, and to talk about swarms and existential threats. And trying to, I mean, Suella Braverman, she just got fired a couple of weeks ago, fortunately, but people like her are still very influential in the Labour, in the Tory party. I don't know what you said, but she was trying to undermine international law. She went to the United States. She spoke to, you know, think tanks, right-wing think tanks, and what they're trying to do is to weaken, you know, the Convention on Migrants of 1951 and also other international treaties that we have. So when they can't do what they want, when they're held back by international law, they're trying to change it. And this is what we're seeing right in front of our eyes. So what they're doing is attacking everything that makes us civilized. And also, I was very distressed to read, you know, what your Greek Prime Minister said, and I hope you can use this. When he went to Germany, was it 10 days ago? Mitsotakis, am I pronouncing it?
Yeah.
Mitsotakis. He said, the Coast Guard is not a reception agency. The same goes for our border patrol and land border. I mean, he's making jokes, bad taste. He's being sarcastic. The government, the Coast Guard is not a reception agency. And
they don't care about people. They don't care about the lives of their own people. It's exactly, that's why I believe that the movie will talk to the Greek audience more than in any other, maybe the Spaniards.
It's state terrorism, and we have to say it's state terrorism. And we should start talking to tourists, because that must be the only way we will impinge on their power. I feel, because the Greek people you meet are absolutely fantastic. I mean, last week at the film festival, it was a joy to be with people, a real joy, vivacious, Mediterranean in the best sense of the word, open, want to discuss, want to argue, you know, brilliant. I mean, a real joy to be there. And then you've got this vicious right-wing government who make jokes about killing people. What a bunch of bastards. Yes, or sorry, I can't help it. But in terms of the woman, you know, wearing the hijab or not, what we did was we just spoke to the people in the film, you know, and some, you know, like Yara, she you know, the character Ebla, you know, she actually spoke to her Syrian mother in the film, and they had a discussion about whether they would or whether they wouldn't. And the idea would be, well, they won't wear it until she gets married, and then when she's married, she was going to wear it. So this was the backdrop to it. So So there was a range of voices, and we wanted to respect that, you know.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing, and it changes from country to country. Like the Palestinians never wear the.
Mhm.
In many cultures, it's only a scarf.
And even within families, there were, you know, differences, because we had. It was very, very important for us to listen to everybody, because I don't speak Arabic. I spent a lot of time with Syrians. You try to understand the history. You watch the documentaries. You read the books. You try to listen to their music, and most of all is to listen to people. And we also had people who were kind of like, you know, people there who helped us with cultural questions, religious questions. You know,
you have a reference in the church. I read about you. I didn't know that about you. I only know your movies, about having a religious background, isn't it?
well, I mean, I was brought up. Yes, I'm not a religious person at all, but I understand where it comes from.
Okay,
You know, my
because
mother.
you're kind with the church, and the church is something beautiful in the way you show it. It gives food to people. She goes in the church and she's really moved by it, by the beauty, and it's the ugliness she lived and the beauty she sees there. But it's a church.
Yes, given I come from a Catholic background, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's 1 billion Catholics in the world, you know, and we've got everything to right-wing Steve Bannon, you know, and the, you know, right-wing bastards, you know, who are horrible. But in Nicaragua, I met the Christian-based community, and they were more Marxist than Catholic, you know, and, you know, radical people with a big, big heart. So you find all sorts, and you find all sorts within the Muslim community too. And the great problem of storytelling is stereotypes, and people stereotype all Catholics are all Muslims together. And actually, in this story, when I went to these communities, it was the church groups who were at the forefront of holding out, you know, the hand of friendship, but also understanding the host community. The local churches were fantastic, great people. Just to say, you know, but I also know what the Catholic Church is like in countries where they are the establishment, like in Spain.
You seem to be like a very good team with Ken. You work together for how many years now?
Oh,
How
so
does
much
it?
fun.
Yeah, I was joking with my partner that you're like the McCartney, the Lennon and McCartney of the British film in a way.
Oh well, that's a high compliment. Yeah, a high compliment. We'll
Yeah.
have to fight about who is who. Yes, well, we've had the most remarkable run. You know, he's been a most wonderful collaborator. You know, he's. I can say that now because, you know, it's sometimes it can seem cringeable, you know, when one partner is speaking about another. But he's a remarkable man, really. I've had the best luck in the world to have crossed paths with him. We've worked for over 30 years. I think we've done about 14 feature-length films and some shorts together. And but it's always been the same. But the secret to it, I suppose, is we do different jobs. You know, I write, he directs, but we meet in the middle as filmmakers. Our loyalty is to the story. And he's got no big ego. He's a very, very tough collaborator because intellectually he's so sharp. But he's also a very generous one. You know, he realizes you couldn't find a man who's kinder to writers, because he says that is the biggest and the most important, you know, creative act in any film, is getting the story right. You know, so he's always said he's always followed the writers. So he's been remarkable. And the lovely thing is as well, because, you know, I suppose you have to be joined at the hip politically, you know, because the big questions we don't actually even have to debate or talk about. You know, our instinct to the stories that we want to tell is very, very similar. At the end of the day, it goes back to your values, how you see the world, and how, I suppose, what's always fascinated us, you know, is just, you know, character is never in isolation, really. You know, it's always, you can only understand a character if you understand their environment. My name is Joe in Sweet 16. If he came from a rich family, we'd have no story, you know, and that was kind of implicit. We didn't have to discuss these things, you know, so. But we also realised too, both of us, that a good issue doesn't make for a good story. You always have to find a great story, you know, and if it becomes rhetorical or two-dimensional, what you do is you kill the story and you kill people's interest in it. So we really try to respect the audience. The audience is very, very bright, you know, and they understand contradiction, they understand nuances. And that's very, very important to us.
Another thing is, and I was thinking about it, and especially how Ken Loots was probed when he was taking political stance. There was a war against him in several instances. Is there a place in the British industry, film industry today, for people like you and him, or in general in the world, in the Western film industry?
Ken is, well, I mean, when the film won the Palme d'Or, the wind that shakes the barley, and the attacks against the film were remarkable. But we and also with Daniel Blake as well, when it won the Palme d'Or, there was discussions in Parliament and questions in Parliament. And in fact, the person who is now the Home Secretary, the new Home Secretary, he was the Foreign Minister, called it a work of fiction. If you make those types of films, you expect attacks like that. So it's no surprise, no surprise at all. Is there a place for us? Well, I mean, the great thing about working with Ken was we kept the budgets quite small. And so if everybody managed to get their money back again, a modest amount was made so that we could make the next film, so it's not like big, huge, budgets. And then if you have low budgets, you can keep much more control of the material. And that was always very, very important to us. Because people think, oh, well, where are the new people making films like you? I keep meeting young people who've got great ideas. But the question is, who's going to commission them to write a screenplay? And then who's going to finance the film? And then even if the film is made, you know how tough it is to actually get distribution. And then it's the connection with the exhibitors. And I think this is why I think film is in crisis, and we have to protect these public spaces, almost like the Old Oak. These are places where people come together to meet. And it's beautiful. It was lovely being in the film festival last week. And I must, raise my hat to the wonderful Ninos. I don't know if you know Ninos, who runs the festival. 36 years has been doing this. He's in his 80s, and he keeps it going every year. It gets harder and harder. I mean, these guys are heroes in my book, because they protect these public spaces, because people go together with a predisposition to understand people from outside your own experience. Now, that's a really precious place. We have to try and defend it.